Got it.
Okay, Victoria, we did it. We're live.
Yay.
Oh, okay. So we got there at the end. Thank you so much for making the time to be here.
No, thank you.
It's quite funny in a discussion about connectivity that we should have such difficulties in starting this live stream, you know, just no end to irony.
Yes, absolutely. But that's just how it goes.
Yeah. So Victoria, yeah, I mean, I don't know if you had a chance to read the we published an article just earlier on this week in Neo Academy, and we've been thinking a lot this week about, you know, because of the Sustainable Development Goals, a particular goal for quality education, and of course, a lot of the focus is on things like teaching and learning, but, you know, after the pandemic, we had such a, yeah, I guess we already knew about this, but it just kind of brought it into sharper focus, the divide, the digital divide and the access divide and the connectivity divide. You know, when you can't actually physically get to school, and how your access to education is just completely interrupted by things like this, and just the digital really kind of has to be part of the solution. So we really wanted to chat to you because we're really interested in, you know, areas where you've got that kind of public-private partnership, and just, you know, organizations are partnering to get things done and to bring education to more marginalized communities, rural communities. So you, if I understand it, you're head of educational technologies at iData in Ecuador.
Correct. Yeah.
Correct.
So
what that involved, just, and how did you actually end up there?
Long story is all stories, I guess. But yes, I am currently in charge of all the education inside of iData. iData is actually a connectivity company. So education was totally new in it. But as you were mentioning, the pandemic, right? The pandemic changed so much. And since the company was already involved in connectivity, and we knew and we saw how connectivity and the digital were going to be a part of education at some point, but it looked like really far away, especially here in Ecuador, and I guess in all South America. But suddenly we just had to do it. And there's good things about it, and there's not so good things about it. So it's been an interesting road that we've traveled through, and I'll tell you more about it in a little bit more. But going to your question about how did I get here? So how did I get to be in education in a completely technology and connectivity company? I'm actually a psychologist, and I have a minor in sociology. I'm actually finishing up with a master's degree in neuroeducation right now. And well, ever since I graduated college, and before I did, I explored different areas. The social and educational projects were always the ones that sparked me the most. But I always also was in market research, doing some corporate social responsibility. And then I was in the connectivity area with a satellite company that came into Ecuador. And that made me really excited because it was like, we can finally connect all those very far away, very remote areas in Ecuador. And yes, we could, but I also always felt that there was something missing in that solution, in that equation. And I didn't know very well what it was. So I decided to go back into educational and social projects. And well, life kept on going. And suddenly I could bring it all together, all my passions, all my experience and my interests into one project. So suddenly, because of the pandemic, we realized that education was going to shift very quickly, not as progressively as we thought it would be, but really quickly into the digital, into connectivity, and all of what you mentioned, right? So a project started to come to life due to the difficult situations that the whole humanity was experiencing, and that we as iData could see that there was a need that we could actually answer to. So we were experts in connectivity. We had been doing more than 2 decades of custom-made solutions for our customers. We had satellite internet solutions, so we could get to the remote areas, and we just needed a little piece into that puzzle that was, how do we adapt all of this to education? So another thing that was really important into the making of this project was that rural areas were suddenly visible. That's something I'll mention again later, I guess. But the other thing that we realized was that connectivity was not a question anymore. Is it necessary or not? Is it good or not? It was suddenly a need. So things came into place. As I said, I had this this thought when I was working with satellite internet and with the process of connecting rural communities. And it was like, there's something more that's missing here. And suddenly, with our new partner that we found through our more technical team, that went out and looked for the different solutions that the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Telecommunications were looking for at the moment, we found our new partner, or our now partner, Appliances. They're a company based in the UK. And we realized that with one of their products, we finally had the missing piece of that puzzle that I was thinking about all the time. So that, making it a really general summary, to go into the details later. But while working in education, I was always very keen on generating content, on making the hard things be easy to learn for different kinds of populations. I worked with vulnerable populations at different points of my life. I learned how teachers think, what their priorities were, how to get to them. And then on the other side, there was all this CSR experience that I had. I knew that it was vital here to get that piece into the puzzle and to make it happen. So what came to be was Kipa, our project, that basically brings together many of the things that I had been doing for different parts of my life. And of course, I have a wonderful team. We all have a wonderful team, more technical people, more the marketing people, the sales people, who make it all happen. But the educational view that I could bring into the project, and that we could just synthesize to make things happen and to make them useful and real solutions for the communities was really important. So that would be a short summary.
So there's a whole lot of influences going on here. It seems like you found yourself in this situation in which you're well positioned to respond to a need that has become more pressing. So it's interesting. There's a lot of discussion around this, that we try to make these plans about a phased progression towards digital connectivity, and we're still actually having the discussions around access, and then suddenly life has other plans, and from one moment to the next, we're dragged kicking and screaming into the new world, and it's a very uncomfortable process of change for a lot of people, but it seems to be you were in the right sort of position. So to summarize, I understand that, so you were working with Appliances, a UK-based organization, and they were sort of focused on it's like improving the connectivity itself, like improving the bandwidth application, so that connections in rural areas that were only to, say, a single user, with the collaboration of Appliances, could be amplified, so you could actually have whole school connectivity with multiple devices and
Yeah.
opened up all those possibilities. And that's where you were when the pandemic sort of lurched into view, and that's when you sort of saw that you could go further into this new project of Kipa. But before we get to Kipa, I just want to pick up on something you said, because I find it really interesting. We're talking about the discussion that was happening over whether or not connectivity was necessary. And I just want to ask you about this, because it raises another sort of question about, I think it's important for the audience to understand that when we're talking about the rural communities, it's not like, say, in the UK, I mean, I live in a rural area, and the culture, essentially the culture of the city in, say, in Scotland where I am versus the rural areas, it's essentially the same. The pace of life is different, but the culture is essentially the same. In Ecuador, you're talking about a very different culture from the coastal cities, say, where the the population are, to the highlands, and to the indigenous communities, Quechua speakers. It's very, very different there, isn't it? So I mean, how was that part of the discussion? I mean, was the debate the cause of such cultural differences, whether connectivity is good or not, or and how did you kind of cross that? Because obviously there's more complex issues culturally in Ecuador in terms of bringing education from your perspective, to the indigenous or rural areas. So how did you bridge that?
Well, that what you mentioned is really important to have into account. And as you say, you cannot imagine similar a community in rural Ecuador being the same as in the UK, in rural areas of the UK or the US, or etc., because there are differences in a lot of things. And so something that happened here was that finally, I think some of the positive things that happened due to the pandemic, among them, the fact that we started to talk about education and we realized parents being trapped with their kids, they realized how actually fantastic it was that their kids were going to school. And everything that involves that, it's not only the academic part, it's also the social interaction, etc. But another thing that we finally started to talk about, at least in Ecuador, I can talk about that, is that we remembered about the rural areas and we realized how abandoned they were.
Right.
And the fact that the rural areas and the people in rural areas were the only ones that never stopped working all throughout the pandemic, because we needed to eat here in the cities. And wow, then you realize how important they are. And the fact that you don't want people moving out people have free will, of course, and if you want to move to the cities, you can absolutely. And if, as I did, if you want to move out of the city to a rural area, then you should also be able to do that. And the quality of education that you can access in either of those areas should not be a question.
Yes.
An issue in that. And so we started to realize that rural areas had been abandoned for decades in certain areas, such as education and connectivity. So I have thought, and I still think about what you mentioned there, that the different pace, the different philosophy of life that people have in rural areas in Ecuador is something that we in the city should learn about. We shouldn't be teaching them anything in that matter. But there's a reality, and there's the fact that you need to access information. And the amount of information someone in the city can access to is infinite and sometimes even overwhelming. But then the kids and populations in the rural areas were limited to a tiny amount of information. The textbook that was printed in 2010, and probably a couple of other books, and the creativity their teacher could or could not have. So that's where I think there's a line. And I know that we should talk more about the fact that, do we want very rural communities and very indigenous communities, for example, disconnecting themselves from their roots, from their philosophy of life, from their visions, just to give them a tablet and start connecting to the internet. That is a huge issue, and that we are aware of that, and we don't want that. But we cannot deny those kids the access to more information. What we need to give everybody, kids in the city and kids in rural areas, is the abilities to first, of course, access and go their ways, their way through the digital, and learn how to realize what works for them, to filter all the information they're going to be able to go through, to know how to investigate, to know what really works for them, what doesn't. And then eventually what we want out of education, and what makes me passionate about education in general, is the fact that we can empower people and empower kids for them to make their own decisions. So if that's basically the most important thing. So if you take internet only to communities and just throw them tablets or cell phones, I don't think that's a solution. And we've seen how it hasn't been a solution in many cases. But if you walk them through and you train them on how to use it, and then they can adapt it to their own needs, then that's a different scenario. The internet, the digital is just a reality, and we just need to live with it in a balanced way. That's what I would say.
It's kind of like you're making it clear that there's not an imposition of the way of life from the coast on the highlands and on the rural communities, but what you want to do is provide people with the options and the tools to find their own.
They choose. Exactly.
Pathways. Yeah. Okay. So that must be. I imagine you've spent quite a lot of time making this argument. Because I understand it's a very sensitive issue there. Actually having it's such a different way of life. It really is. It really is such a different way of life. And having been left aside for so many years and things, there must be a lot of complicated relationships and feelings between the population centres, the smaller communities. So into this, can you give us an idea of kind of, well, let's look at Kipa first. So that's where we've reached at, when the pandemic hit and you realize that we don't have the luxury of all this time to develop a progressive kind of stage-by-stage approach. Like these communities need access to this stuff now. And so in comes the project Kipa on top of, you're already in these communities, you're already working with appliances to improve the connectivity issue. So what is Kipa, and how does it build upon that existing relationship that you had?
Yeah, so Kipa, for starters, Kipa means future in Quechua, in the native language of most of the indigenous communities of Ecuador. So yeah, that's like our vision there. We just want to take education to the future in a way that's balanced and that respects every community. So our program is focused on giving an integral program of connectivity and a solution to schools and education institutions in rural Ecuador, and well, in a later phase, of course, urban Ecuador as well, because as I'll mention, EdUgatebox, that's the tool that our partner Appliances has developed. It works perfectly for any type of educational institution. So digital education, as well as knowledge about digital tools and connectivity, are part of the future. And we want to provide solutions that can help Ecuadorian education achieve this, because it's a complete solution. That's something important to take into account, and that I know that you're very aware of it, and probably our listeners as well. It's not only the internet, it's not only the devices, it's a whole integral solution. So connection to internet, content, training and getting familiar with technology are key parts of Kipa. So as I told you, as a company, as iData, we have nearly 2 decades of experience in connectivity. So with the pandemic, we realized that education was especially affected. The Ministry of Telecommunications was already a client for us for many years, and we actually knew what their needs were regarding the connectivity of rural areas during the pandemic. They told us we need this list of, let's say, 4 things that we need to connect rural communities. So when we came up with appliances and we learned about their product with Educate, that list of 4 things that the ministry had was all checked, and we had an extra. So what is EdugateBox? It's both a hardware and a software. So it's a tiny, the size of a book, probably like a router, that was created precisely for educational environments. So it's not something that we're adapting for educational environments. It's not like something that's brought up together. It's decades of development for something that's specifically for education. And it's basically an all-in-one equipment that has many functions that were usually sought for in different devices, or that weren't found at all, at least in the Ecuadorian environment. So what does it have? And I'm not going to go into technical details, because probably if my team is watching right now, they're going to cringe. And I'm not technical. We can go through that in another moment, but let's talk about the basics. What does it include? It includes bandwidth optimizers. So with a small connection, you can cover, or you can provide connectivity to many. What happens in many rural areas and semi-rural areas is that the only internet you can reach to is a very low bandwidth. So what happened, and what is still the reality in many areas, schools do have a connectivity, but it can only be used for emails that the teachers need to send to the ministry, and it is not available for the kids to use. So that's the first thing. It's a bandwidth optimizer, filters, so we can leave out all the things that we don't want kids entering into during school hours, like social media, or just things that we don't want them to see at all, pornography, etc. And then a very big memory for digital libraries that you can create. So we as Kipa include content there, but the idea is that the community, the educational community, the teachers are able to create or to find their own material and upload it into a library. And then that way we are not tied up to one textbook, as we were talking about. And then there's content and a learning space, all of this in a single tool. So it has been around for more than a decade, the EdugateBox, and it has successfully helped thousands of schools in more than 50 countries to transition from a no connectivity, no digital in a school, to a very connected and dynamic education. So right now, so as I said, we started working with the Ministry of Telecommunications. They have had some needs. They were like advising the Ministry of Education. And now we're working directly with the Ministry of Education. And we have more than 30 connected Kipa points in different areas of rural Ecuador. So to the EdugateBox, that's our star, and that is really something that has helped us and has changed how we can look at connectivity in education. We add a very important component, that's training and follow-up. So I'll talk a little bit more into detail about that in a while, but basically that's what makes Kipa and not only the EdugateBox. That it's not tiny, it's a huge thing, but we've added that into the solution. So For the most part, the schools that we're connecting right now did have an existing internet connection, but they were, as I was saying before, simply not sufficient to cover more than one user or two. With EdUgateBox, we can optimize that and making it sufficient for all users to be able to access educational content, especially and only, actually. On the other hand, we are looking at hundreds of schools that do have computer labs with computers there that are in many ways obsolete. So, for example, we're about to install in a school in Manabi. And when I went there to visit the school and to see what they had and what were their needs, they have a computer lab. But the teacher was telling me, yeah, they're like 3 to 5 year old computers, and I don't think they're gonna work. They look obsolete. But with our solution, all we need is that the computers are able to connect to Wi-Fi and they're good to go. So that's also a way of optimizing resources that already exist, that were already invested in the past. What happened right now, and with very good and positive intentions, companies and people started to donate tablets and different devices so kids would be able to connect. And that's fantastic for schools that have nothing. But there are schools that already have something. But those computer labs were just full of dust and they were completely left behind because the computers it looked like they didn't work anymore. So that's also something very important for us. Optimize what already exists, be it a connection that was already made but is not sufficient, or with equipment that simply doesn't work anymore. So we provide content in a digital library, as we were saying, educational videos and digital books that are actually content that exists freely for us in a city or in a well-connected area. YouTube videos. YouTube is fantastic. We just don't want kids to go through the whole YouTube thing and have all the distractions. What we do is download that educational video about the human body into the library, and the kid will only view that video. They won't be exposed to all of the other distractions that YouTube can have. And that's the thing for me. It's crazy to see how much the internet has, because the internet has a lot of very interesting and very dynamic information and content, but kids in rural areas were simply not accessing it because of, well, lack of access to connectivity. And once they did have connectivity, if somebody, because of some reason, connected an antenna there, they were accessing Facebook and the things that they already knew, but they weren't actually looking for more learning. Another thing that's really interesting and that we love about our solution is that we have the opportunity to have what are called offline pages. So these are basically versions of online pages such as Khan Academy or Fed Interactive Simulations or even Wikipedia that exist, that the owners of the content created in order to be able to access it, and they are saved in the memory of the EdUgate. So when you access them, when the kids are accessing them, they're not accessing the internet, they're accessing the memory of the EdUgate. So 50 kids can be connected to Khan Academy at the same time or to Wikipedia with a different format. It's not such interactive kind of page, but it works because a lot of kids can be connected at the same time. So yeah, most of the content we share is actually free. And it's easy to access as long as you have appropriate connectivity. If you don't, then the problem starts. Rural areas in Ecuador have none or really deficient connections, and the gaps just keep widening in educational and therefore economic and many other aspects of the population. So right now, and as we were mentioning before, no connectivity now means no access. And millions of kids are depending on textbooks that are 1 trillion years old, that are not dynamic, or that probably just don't work for a different learning ability, for example, for them to educate themselves. Teachers are also depending on plain material as well. Kids right now just need more action. And I'm not saying that we need to surround them with all the sounds and all the lights, but we just need to give teachers a little help as well. Teachers depend on what they can access, and that is just not fair. Access to knowledge should be available for all, no matter where you live, where you're located. And well, we know right now that the internet is a solution for that, but then we come with problems such as social media, pornography, and other inconveniences that are found in the network. Not everything can be perfect, of course. So the fact that you can go to YouTube, you now can consider yourself, the fact that not because you can go to YouTube, you can consider yourself literate in digital technology is also important to consider, because if you give a kid in a rural area a cell phone, they probably will go into YouTube, but that doesn't mean they're literate in digital technology. That doesn't mean they can filter what they need, what makes sense, what doesn't. So that's something that Educate and the whole Kipa solution helps us to come into place. We help schools go toward the digital education, literally like taking their hand and helping them around, because you need that. Because you, as I was saying, you can't, and at least we believe that we can't just throw them devices and connectivity and expect it to work. And another thing we take into account, and I was about to forget about this, is the fact that there are entire communities surrounding schools. Older siblings, parents, grandparents, communities, who also have the right to access information. And so we also provide content that is relevant for them, such as documentaries, information on nutrition, for example, that was provided to us by the Food and Agriculture Organization, and even training programs on agriculture that are for free. So that's really important, because the connectivity we provide covers up the school building and the surroundings. And as you might know, since you were in rural Ecuador, schools are usually close to the community church, for example, and it's a meeting place. And that's the idea, that you can actually meet there and you can actually access the internet, but for something that will help you develop. And not just make you believe that life in the city is better than life in the rural areas, and that's it, So the internet and the digital world are really something great, and they are here to stay, and we can't deny that. And teachers, in-person teachers, and I want to make that clear, are essential, but they need a hand. They need help in order to achieve a more independent learning process with their students, and we're here for that. Our tool helps them do that. Think about rural schools that have only one teacher or two for the whole elementary school. That's a reality in rural Ecuador here, a very common reality. Think about the kid who learns faster and is usually bored in class, or the one who needs a little bit more time and is sometimes behind. With resources put on in the library, and the teacher there as a guidance that can go helping each kid as they go through their materials, they can all strive, and everything can be more fair, I guess. So that would be.
That's what it comes down to, doesn't it? I mean, you mentioned earlier CSR, and so I, began to think, well, what would be the social responsibility angle beyond the obvious of bringing, connectivity and democratizing education in a way. But you've mentioned some things that are, they're seriously interesting. I mean, so we've got the community angle, so that we're talking about a learning community, because community is hugely important here. You're not just bringing it to school, you're bringing it to the community. So already you're thinking about the wider benefit of access to this. It's not just for the kids, but what else? Who else will benefit from this? And, you mentioned agriculture there. I mean, it's incredible, that these communities are having access to wider pools of knowledge around things that are central to their way of life as well, which is hugely important. And you're right about my experience in rural Ecuador was back in 2004, and that was really, the internet wasn't really a consideration then, but there was a sense of, there really was a sense of being isolated, more than just geographically. It was a feeling of like we've got to take care of ourselves, and the Ministry of Education didn't seem to have any funding. The books were a million years old. It was a lot of like entrepreneurial kind of figuring out donations and campaigning with to get donations from tourists who were in the town and the village, and all kinds of stuff to try to get resources. But what it seems here, that with a simple digital connection, you're kind of democratizing access to that.
Exactly.
And I wonder, critical to this seems to be the training angle. As you said, not just throwing a device at people and saying good luck, and all the best. There's a huge responsibility with access to information, and even right down to the processes of, okay, you talk about one teacher with a huge class size of different levels and interests. There's neurodiversity. There's all kinds of stuff going on in learning environments. That it's very difficult when the teacher has to be the one to take the focus all the time and try to juggle all these things. But of course, we need the support to understand how technology can support them, so they don't end up just using it as a crutch and saying, hey, there you go, look at this or look at that, but actually actively and positively configuring it into the way that they support learners. So how do you do that? This comes into the question about the exact sort of nature of the collaboration that you have with the Ministry of Education. What does the partnership look like? You're providing an amazing solution for them, that's for sure. I can see the benefit right there, but in terms of the training and how you work together with supporting the teachers to really get the best out of this and integrate it within a more progressive way of teaching, perhaps, or inclusive way of teaching, but also how they support the learners, the kids themselves, understand how to filter information, how to navigate this massive quantities of information that are flooding into these communities. So how does that look on the ground? What does the training focus on, and how does it work in partnership with the ministry?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna lie, we've tried to figure it all out in the past year and a half in different ways. So I don't know if you're aware, but in Ecuador, schools were completely closed up until a couple of, or 3 or 4 months ago. Then certain schools did their plans, and they started to gradually go back to school. And well, now most of them, at least in the coast, and I think in the highlands as well. I'm sorry, since I'm living in the coast now, I'm more aware of that area, because we have 2 different like time zones or something like that. But it was a matter of just figuring out how to train the teachers. So in the very beginning, because the first Kipa points that were connected in June of 2020. So in the very center of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So we had to figure out a way of making it work and of making teachers aware of how it can help their students. So what happened in that moment was that we wanted the digital library especially to be the main tool for them at that moment, because what were they doing in rural areas at the moment was printing out like worksheets or stuff, and that kids would pick up once a week, once every 2 weeks, once every month, and they would just have to figure out how to do them. So what we encouraged the teachers to do, and this was a very challenging part, was doing it in video conferences. Some teachers could connect because they lived in connected areas. Some just couldn't. So we found ways to get to them through videos, recorded videos, etc., because we couldn't even move around. So that was very challenging. But what we wanted at that moment was that the library would be a digital library that kids could access. And that way they wouldn't only have to solve their worksheet, their math worksheet or whatever by themselves, but the teacher could add up videos of themselves explaining something or of somebody else explaining it to them. Because of course, they did do online Zoom or Microsoft Teams meetings, but not all the kids could connect. A lot of rural families invested in a device, in a smartphone during that time. But the reality is that there were families with 3, 4, 5 kids in the family that were all in school age, and they only had one device. So if they all had class at the same time, they just couldn't access it. So you could not demand them to be there all the time. The only way of keeping track of the kids were what they're bringing in their folders at the end of the month or at the end of the semester. So that was a challenging time. And what we've done with the Ministry of Education, going back to your question, so we work hand in hand with the area of technologies for education in the ministry, because they're the experts in that. They have created a whole platform, online platform, that we have included in our Kipa solution. So what we've done is that we've cached it into our EdUgateBoxes, and kids can access it in a very good speed of internet, and many kids can connect at the same time. So that was like the beginning of our relationship. And now we've kept on working together to see what the needs are in training. So we've worked with the area of teacher training in the Ministry of Education as well. And of course, now that we start getting more funding, knowing where to connect, we can think that this area is good or needs to be connected, but the ministry is the one who knows it best. So going a little bit back, what we want is to serve rural communities in the best way. We don't want to divide efforts, but multiply them so they are efficient. And of course, the ministry can guide us through that process. In terms of resources specifically, we work to be facilitators of an alliance that is necessary, I think, for all developing countries to move forward. That between the public sector, Ministry of Education in this case, the private companies, and NGOs. So private companies have the resources, CSR programs, or simply because they know that's the way to go right now. NGOs also have resources sometimes, but they also have content. Like, for example, with the Food and Agriculture Organization, they had all this training program for rural communities to learn how to eat in a nutritious way, but they just weren't getting to the rural areas. So we make alliances with them. And with the government, of course, to make things happen, to go out there and make things happen, basically. What we're doing right now, that we're going back to in-person schooling, is starting to build a model, a methodology that we will test, because that's what we have to do. We just test and see what works. We were not pretending that we know everything. So we go out and test the methodology that's basically, in a very broad way, made up of socializing with the community first, and then training the teachers on how to use the tool. Using the tool is fairly easy. It's not a very complicated and it's fairly easy to use it. It has an LMS included in it, and it's very intuitive. But of course, we're not assuming that it's intuitive for a rural teacher. And so we go through that, and then we choose a champion that will be the expert in the subject, in the EdUgate, once we leave the territory, because we don't want them to depend on us forever. In the trainings, we take the teacher's hands and guide them through how they can use the tool in the classroom, because, as I say, using the tool is fairly easy. Knowing how to put it all together in a lesson might not be that easy. And that is the key, to gradually teach them how to incorporate the technology. And each case will be different. Some schools might have been somewhat familiar with digital education. Some are communities that don't even have a cell phone signal. So you can imagine how that goes. So with the ministry, what we're doing is going out and with their approval, going to look for more funding, basically. The public companies know that they need to get involved in this, because if we want Ecuador to be a better place to be, to live for Ecuadorians and for people who join our country, we need to change what's being done in education. So with the ministry, we plan, basically. That's our alliance. They now know our product. They've had a year and more to see how it works. They really like it. They know that it's the best solution around, because it has, as I said, many tools in one. And what we do is just find ways to keep connecting the rural areas, basically.
It seems like, this is evolving. Obviously, your first Kipa point was in summer 2020. Wow, so this is still new, but in terms of a partnership model, it seems like this is something that really works. You're collaborating in a way. It reminds me of in the Philippines, they've got there's a new kind of law for internet service providers and broadband providers that you can't just come into the high density population urban areas, make loads of money because of all the people there that you're servicing, and leave the rural areas behind, because there's not much profit there, because it's it's so sparsely populated and the cost of service is much higher. But they're saying, hey, if you want to come into these urban centers, you also have to provide service to these rural communities. That's part of the deal of getting the contract here. And it seems like this is kind of the way it goes. You've got governments working in partnership with NGOs, with private firms, and with kind of philanthropy in a way, or corporate social responsibility activity from private firms and individuals that perhaps just want to donate and support and pledge funding. So you've got this whole kind of complex web of people sort of working together. Make it happen. It doesn't seem like something that any individual entity can do on their own. I can't imagine the ministry would have managed to do this very easily.
Yeah, I think that what you say is the key to it. We can't keep pretending that we can do it all by ourselves. I think that's a key learning probably from the pandemic for me, and in different areas, in different aspects, like neighbors helping each other and everything. We need to stop being so proud, I guess, and think that we can do it all by ourselves. And we just need to help each other. I am not pretending to know which community needs connectivity. To get to the teachers, actually, that's something very interesting. You need to have the okay, let's say, of the Ministry of Education to say, hi, the ministry allowed me to come in here. And then, of course, a lot of things that I wanted to mention before getting to the teachers and rural teachers with something that has to do with internet and with connectivity. It can sometimes be tough, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but at least here, it's like they feel threatened by the fact that sometime probably they can be replaced or something like that because of connectivity. And that's not the point. That, as I said a couple of minutes ago, in-person teachers, they are the saviors of our community, and they should be regarded as so. And in-person education should not ever be replaced, in my opinion. But giving more flexibility to that education is key. And having the ministry support us in that, and having the ministry say, yes, this is good. We know that this is something that will help teachers that are multi-grade teachers that need to handle 1st to 6th grade or to 7th grade in one classroom, that it will make their lives easier and the students' education better, then that's a key. And then, of course, the resources of the public the private companies, and sometimes even the content. A lot of content is being created. When we started with this project, I thought ignorantly that the first thing we needed to do was to create content. And no, please, no more content needs to be done. Of course, some companies are and some organizations are doing it. First, it takes a lot of money that we didn't have, and it takes knowledge. It takes a lot. But there's a lot of content that's already being done about nutrition, about the academic subjects, of course, but also about things that kids and parents need to know about: nutrition, environment, protection, and prevention of violence. And there's a lot out there. We just need to put it all together in a place and give it to the kids and the teachers so they can use it as they best think they should. And I think that's the key.
Yeah. I mean, I understand what the barriers. I could completely empathize with the idea of a rural community, particularly in the history of somewhere like Ecuador, where you have this idea of the imposition on rural communities of exploitation of their labor and their resources. Here we go. If you have what they might perceive as a private company coming in, there will be imagine a suspicion or guardedness. So it helps have the legitimacy of the partnership with the ministry. But I wonder, I mean, just to kind of to finish off, I mean, looking to the future, do you think there's a pathway? I mean, I'm thinking about, say, in a rural community, you mentioned something about flexibility, and I think that's key here in terms of not just access to education, not just access to material and connectivity, but it's also the flexibility of when and where and how you connect, so that it can be synchronous and asynchronous, and learning can begin to fit around your life and your needs. So if you need to help your family who are, have a milpa, like a patch of land or something, where they're farming, and you don't have to drop out of school because you can meet that obligation and then complete your learning at a time that's suitable for you. And maybe we have a way to reach more kids and help support them with access to education around the responsibilities that are unique to their communities and their lives. I mean, is that part of the vision for the future, or what is the vision for where this is going? Because I mean, from 2020 summer is very, very new. Where's it all headed? What's the broad vision?
So I think that about education, technology, and connectivity, what really makes it so important is the fact that it can help us close gaps. And those gaps they exist all throughout our society. And for us, it really means a lot to remove the idea that in order to get a good education, you must go to urban areas, to the cities. That is something that's very common here. Rural areas are vital for our world. That's how we get our food. They are vital. I'm not going to go into that because I think we are aware of that. Kids learning and growing in that environment just have a different vision. They are more peaceful, they have a different worldview, and we need that view. We need those two worlds to come together. So with this said, I think that the vision and our mission as Kipa is to work for an Ecuador of more inclusion, of closing gaps in the access to high quality digital education and education in general. We want to empower students and teachers in rural areas through the access and training in digital tools and content. So, and also, of course, to manage the co-responsibility that must exist between the social and economic actors to push forward the country's education. And as you said, to just keep very present the need of flexibility in our education and in our society. I think that's something that we learned in the pandemic, but now that we're going back to normal in some aspects, I feel like we're forgetting about that.
Yeah.
And like kids going back to school and then suddenly they're being penalized if they miss 1 hour of school because they had to, I don't know, do something. It's like, we just learned that we can do both things. And I think that's what's important to keep this vision of flexibility, of an education that can adapt to different realities, to different abilities, learning abilities, to neurodiversity, that kids can find a way to learn in a way that works for them.
Right.
That would be like a very to the future view that we would like to contribute in some way. Well, I'm not pretending that we're going to do it by ourselves. We just think we can contribute to that.
So for people that are looking to find out more about what you're doing, possibly interested in partnership and things like that, I mean, what kind of things are you looking for? You know, is there any gaps in your kind of provision that you're like, hey, we'd want some help with this, whether it's funding or whether it's training or know-how or tech, or network or whatever? So that's my first part of it. My final question, because I know you've got stuff to do. What is it you need, and where can people best go to find out more about you and get in touch with you about it?
Mm-hmm. So we're basically very new project. The company has been going along for a long time, but this project specifically is new in many ways. So everything that you mentioned works for us. You know, we keep ourselves humble, and if there are similar projects going around in the world, and somebody who's listened to this knows something that I just said is just very wrong or very right, and just want to help out, that would be very much appreciated. And of course, resources, so we can keep connecting more communities. We just need to do that. Kids are going back to school in person soon, but that just makes it more urgent that we reconnect, so we don't let them go back to the same education that was happening before the pandemic. And yeah, know-how and well, devices are a huge need in some areas. As I said, in some communities, the computer labs were there. We just need to make them work again. But in other areas, devices are also a need. So that is also very welcome. And I'm just going to, so if you want to find more about us, we are on Instagram as Kipa Futuro. It's Kipa Futuro, Futuro. Spelling these were not my thing. And also you can find us as iData.ec on the web, and you can look for our specific project in there. So yeah, looking forward to, if somebody has something to say, be it good, bad, whatever, just feedback is always welcome, and we're always willing to learn.
Thank you, Victoria. It's been really, it's a beautiful vision. You know, you're doing important stuff. It seems like you're at the ground, like where change needs to happen, and not working from the top floor of some office tower, but in the community, partnering with the community, you know, partnering with anybody who can help. Yes. You know, just to think about serving the people who need it most, which is how things should be, if I can offer my own opinion. So I'm glad that you're out there doing it, and we'll certainly share this with our community at Neo Academy, and you know, let's keep talking. And, yes, and figure out how we can help, or how we can work together. That's, you know, thank you very much, Mark. Way forward. Thank you so much for your time. I'll leave you back to Quito. What temperature is it in Quito just now?
It's 10 degrees right now, which is not very common. 10 degrees Celsius. It's colder than usual.
Colder than usual, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's very cool for us. So yeah, thank you very much, Mark. It's been a really nice conversation, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be invited here. So yeah, looking forward to keeping in contact, and have a great rest of the day.
Will do, and you too. Thank you so much, Victoria. Okay, we'll speak to you soon. Bye now. Thank you.
Goodbye.